Begin the current Daf, Mesechtes Bava Kama Daf Yud Beis. We begin on the top of Yud Beis and Aleph, 3 lines down at the top of the Yomid, where we're in the middle of a conversation for the previous Daf. An unrelated teaching really to our Mesechta, but we introduced 6 different teachings of Ula Omer Rebbe Laza, because we had mentioned a teaching of his that did relate to the previous Gemara's discussion of Shaman, Leganim, Legazlan. So once we introduced him, we mentioned many different teachings. The last one was regarding the halacha that you gave him in avodim. You could collect collections from a debtor, from a bar. You could collect from slaves. On that, the question was, Rabbi Nachman asked to Ula, did Ula say even from orphans? He says no, only from the person himself. So that was the Gemara connected to the conversation about if avdi are k'makarkoi dummy or k'matatli dummy. If they're like makarkoi, then you could collect from the yasmi because the karka is meshubit. But if they're like matatlin, then you would only be able to collect from him himself, and that was their machlekes between Rav Nachman and Ula, if avadi are like meyasmi or k'makarka, and that's what the Gemara continues on that theme. Cheers, Kos Bazav Kalzach and Chazko turn to Daf Chaim during today's Daf. Should be a schus for Achayim Bnei Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael throughout the entire world. So I'm discussing today's Daf our Kinyan Agav, that you can purchase one thing, and through that you can also acquire something else. The halacha machalei eser sadas b'esem medinos. If someone sells 10 properties in 10 different countries, once he takes possession of one of them, he acquires all of them, and the Gemara explains the svar why that would be. The status of a slave, like we said, if they're k'makarkoi or k'matatli, you consider slaves as a piece of property or as a movable item. The concept of naidi, which is even if we'll consider it as karka or matatlin, it might be different because it's movable. The chasim she'im ben meila is the concept of there are certain assets that don't have meila to them. And the halacha of kachim kailam mom and bailam is that even though it's a carbon, but since it's a lower level like that of a shlamim, it's actually owned. It's considered the money of the owner. The halacha of the b'char, what's the status of a firstborn animal before it's slaughtered, after it's slaughtered, the tam or balmum, whose money is that? And the halacha of hasham gizelos, which is when someone steals something, so he's chayiv for a carbon asham and a karen b'chaimish, the principal when he swears falsely, and then he is liable also for an added fifth as a penalty. So as we continue from the previous stuff, the Gemara is discussing this machlekes of avdi k'makarkoi or is avdi k'matatla damim. So the Gemara brings the third line down at the top of the Yom Dafid Beis and Aleph. Hava uvda ben Arda. There's a story in Narda, the Agvu Dayana de Narda, and the judges of Narda, they collected from orphans the avadim. And Hava uvda ben Pumbedisa. There was a story in Pumbedisa. The Agvi Rav Chana Babizna and Rav Chana Babizna collected from the orphans, which evidently is because they held that the avadim are like karka, and therefore you could collect that from the orphans because there's a shibud. Rav Nachman said to them, Zilu ahaduru, go ahead and give it back to them. As Tais explains, he considered it as what's called a toy b'dvar mishnah. The halacha is brought in Sanhedrin Avav that if a judge makes an error in a explicit mishnah, then it's not. We don't consider it as done; it's undone, and therefore he said, go and give it back. And he considered it as such a blatant error that they made. And if not, I'm going to go and take your own mansions and I'm going to give it to the victim because of this erroneous ruling. That's what Rav Nachman told the judges. That Rav Nachman said to Rav Nachman, what's your problem? Ha'ula, ha'rabalaza, ha'dayan narda, Rav Chana Babizna, all of them from this Amid and from the previous Amid, they all hold that avad is k'mekarkoi. They all hold it's like real estate, and therefore you could collect that from the orphans. Mar, you who you're saying it's a metalman, so much so that you're saying that the judges made an error in collecting it. Kamat Srilahu, who do you hold like already? Like that you're saying that they made an error in halacha. Amalei said to him, "Ano masnitu yadam." He says, "I know a brisa," which discusses this. That although we find many places that avad kari, but it explains that there's different parameters of the halacha, and therefore we're trying to figure out who does he hold like that he held that this is the halacha that avadim are like metatlin. He says the Totni Avimi. Avimi taught the following brisa. Pruzbul, the Gemara Gittin of Lamavav Merav explains that Hillel Hazakan instituted a pruzbul, which was that a person's loan should not be canceled in the Shemitah year. The reason why he did that was because people didn't want to lend money anymore. So because it's going to be canceled. So he made this takan rabban of pruzbul. So this principle is chal ala karka. It takes effect only if the person has real estate, meaning since there's nothing that's lacking collecting, and because there's property over here, which obviously you don't collect karka, it's there, it's always will stay over there. And this guy wrote on them that any debt that he has on him, that'll be able to collect it whenever he wants to. So that's in the possession of the malva. So as long as the borrower has a piece of land, so then you could write a principle. But the einachal alavadim does not take effect on a slave, because again, it's and this is going to be the important point about defining that you see that obviously an eved is not like karka. That's why you cannot write a principle on the slave. So too continues the brisa, metaltlen niknin imakarka. Movable items can be acquired with real estate, meaning if someone's selling him, says, I'm selling you that house, and he's also selling him some other stuff that he has, a pogo stick or who knows, and the guy takes possession of the house, of the karka, he acquires the metaltlen, the movable item, even though he didn't do mashich, he didn't actual kinyan on the movable item, which is a kinyan agav, but ve'ena niknim im avadim. They're not acquired with the slaves. That is, if the person takes possession of the slave, he does not acquire the movable items, and the seller could back off in the movable items. So again, there's more than one source here in this brisa that obviously avda is kimetatli. The slave is not like karka, it's like metalli. Okay, so that's why he was saying that this is a mistake, and the halacha is that the avadim cannot be collected from the orphans. But says the Gemara, let me get tanoi. Let's say it's actually machlokes tanoi. Why? Because the Gemara brings the following brisa. Someone sells to someone else slaves and real estate. Okay. If he takes possession of the slaves, meaning he does a kinyan, is not acquired the properties. If he takes possession of the properties, he has not acquired the slaves. Now, although this Tana holds that avodim are like metaltalin, and that's why if you take possession of the slave, you cannot acquire the karka. But even so, if you take possession of the karka, you're not going to acquire the eved, because only if the eved is standing inside of this field when you're taking possession of the field, as the Gemara is going to explain later on. Because although generally metaltalin don't have to be, and the eved is metaltalin, but the Gemara is going to explain that shani metaltalin denaidi and metaltalin loy naidi, a movable a metaltalin that's in motion, that has motion to it, is different than a stationary metaltalin. And therefore, the reason why this price is saying that if you acquire the karka, you're not going to acquire the eved, is because the eved is not inside the field right now. So, but Al-Kapan, this is going to be the price that's going to tell us that avodim are like metaltalin. Now, let's say karkos metaltalin. Let's say you sell real estate and movable items. Hichzik b'karka kon metaltalin. So that's the classic halacha. You take possession of the karka. You're going to acquire also the movable item. The metaltalin, like on the karka, if you take possession of the metaltalin, that's not going to acquire the karka with it. So again, we spoke about avodim and karka. We spoke about metaltalin and karka. And now avodim and metaltalin, category number 3, says the brisa. Let's say someone's selling someone slaves and movable items. You take possession of the slaves, you don't acquire metaltalin, which obviously, again, he's saying clearly, explicitly, that the eved is not like karka, because if it was, then you would acquire the metaltalin with it. Metaltalin, like on the avodim, if you take possession of metaltalin, you do not acquire slaves. So that's one brisa. So this brisa is telling us that avodim are like metaltalin. But the problem is, if you take possession of the slaves, you do acquire movable items. Wait a second, that sounds like he holds that it's karka. Says the Gemara, isn't this what they're disagreeing about? The Marasab, the Tana, the second the Brisa held up on this karkoi dummy, that slaves are like property. And the first Brisa held up on are like movable items, and therefore you will not acquire metaltalin with it. Seemingly, this is a machlekes tanoim. This machlekes we had of the Amayram. He says no, not necessarily the case. Why? The Kulam, I can tell you that everyone holds that slaves are like karka. So the second brace that said that you're going to acquire the metaltalin through the acquisition of the slave, well, shapa, that's obviously very good. That's the halacha that we say every time you acquire karka, you acquire metaltalin. But the time like what do you do with the Bryce that said that when you mekaina the avodim, you're not going to require the metalton with the wine? That I thought Abdi, you tell me everyone holds kimekarkor dummy. Because in the karka dummy the aram mitzuris be Yehuda. You're right. Halachically, it's the equivalent of karka, but it's a certain type of karka, which generally a regular karka has, that has to be similar to the fortified cities of Judea, because it's from that pasuk that the Gemara learns out, Mesechtes Kedushin of Chavav Medalav, that metalton are required when you take possession of the karka, which is, as the Gemara is going to bring shortly, the pasuk. It says that the father gave them gifts with the fortified cities. So you need to have that the karka is deloinaidi, that's not movable, that's stationary, which generally karka is like that, like over there. It's not like within the Mishnah Mesechtes Kedushin. The Mishnah tells us this halacha. The source is the chasim she'en lemachayis. Properties that don't have insurance, which is code name for metalton, because you can't insure it, they can be stolen. The Mona Lisa can end up who knows where. Niknim in the chasim is acquired with property sheyesh lemachrayis, that you do have insurance, meaning property is something you could always insure yourself because you know it's always going to remain there. And so therefore, basically it's saying that metalton could be acquired with karka, but kesef with either when you take possession of the property with either money or b'shtar, with a document, b'chazaka, taking possession. Now, menuanamili, where do you know this idea that the Mishnah is saying is kedushin? So Amachizki says, because Amakar the Pasuk says in the Biyam base. So their father gave them matan as many gifts, like kesef, b'lazav, b'migdana, for silver and gold and delicacies. Im orem mitzureis b'Yehuda, with the fortified cities in Judea. So when they took possession of the cities, that's how they acquired metalton. Oh, so just like cities don't move, so then if you want to acquire the kinya agav, that's the type of karka that you can acquire metalton with. But even if you're going to halachically say that it's like that's what he said, that the joke that the guy who made his sukkah and he had kept all his silver inside the sukkah and the ganav came and stole it, and he comes to the roof, he says, you lied. He says, what do you mean? You told me that if I make my walls out of lavud, you told me that if I have laws with less than 3 tvachim, then it's famacht, savant. So how did the ganav come and steal the zilbe in the Weinig, right? The Ganav wasn't such a lamdin. He didn't realize that Meken Shananshtek in the hand in Avant, right? So I'm saying even halachically you'll consider the Eved like karka, befot anishta karka. He moves around, so it's not our mitzuchas b'Yehuda, and therefore that's why we're not going to acquire metalton agab the karka. That's one mahalach. Or you could say the other way around. You could say no, that actually. I can tell you that everyone holds that avodim are movable items. Now, so the other time, this they learn the Bryce Loikana, the one that says he didn't acquire. Okay, very good. That makes sense because, like we're saying, that everyone holds metalton into a shopper. The question then becomes, the Tanya Kana. The one that says that you are going to be kinda. How's that work? That's talking about ba'idin alav. That's talking about when the metalton is on him. When it's on him, even though he's metalton, you'll acquire the metalton that's on the metalton. Says Gemara, whoa, how does that work? Who cares that it's on him? He's a moving courtyard. So even if you'll say that he's your eved and you own him and he's your courtyard, it's your possession, it's like a chamor, whatever it is, that it's your property. But for chatzim aleches leikana, a moving courtyard is not going to acquire al kinin karka of agav because we're saying it's not karka, it's metalton. And so, what are you going to acquire with? Who cares if metalton's on him? A chatzir maleches. It's leikana. And if you're going to say, we're talking about ba'imid when he stopped, when he's standing. But Rabbi says, kol shilu b'halach leikana. If it would be going, it wouldn't be acquiring for its owner anything because it's not a chatzir when it's moving. So then even when it's stopped and it's sitting, you're also not going to acquire because it's characteristically a flaw, not in actually when it's moving. It's not going to be qualified as a chatzir. So how are you saying that you're going to acquire with the eved, even though it's a metalton, when the other metalton is on his back?
That's assuming that only a chatzir.
How else? That's what I'm saying. How else is metalton acquiring for you? That's what the Gemara is trying to figure out. If you say there's a halacha of agav or the halacha of chatzir, well, how else? Who cares that it's on top of it?
He does have unique characteristics, including that which is in turns it to chatzar.
Well, Chatzar is not.
When he's stationary, he can be kohen the chatzar, or when he's moving and walking, he can be kohen. Why can't he have more than a chatzar? Who says he has to be exactly like a piece of carpet?
No, the shaila is which kinyan are you using when you're going to acquire the Evid? You want to acquire also, let's say, there's a rug, an oriental rug that you want to buy. There's a chatz, you want to buy from him an Eved and a rug. So we're saying if you acquire the Eved, you're going to acquire the rug also. How is that working? So if it's considered an Eved like karka, so great. When the halach is when you buy karka, you automatically acquire the rug. It could be in some depot. Doesn't make a difference. Some storage bin. You're going to acquire it because that's called kinya agav. That's a unique halacha from agam mitzuras. We have a pasuk in Dibba Yom. Okay, we're saying no. Eved is like metatli. Okay, it's not karka. So how exactly are you going to acquire the rug by acquiring the Eved? So one option the Gemara is saying is it's on the Eved. Okay, so it's on him. You're not doing a kinyan on the rug. So you did a kinyan. Agav, exactly right. So how are you acquiring the rug? So you can say my possessions are my courtyard. What makes chatzar is not only a courtyard. Chatzar is my stuff. My stuff automatically become my domain. So the Eved is my domain. So he's my chatzar, so to speak. So he's my chatzar. But the problem is you can't acquire the kinyan chatzar of mahaleches when it's and you can say, oh, when he stopped. No, it's even if it could move, even when it's not moving, it also is a flaw. So then how are you acquiring if you're saying that Eved is metatli? But in love, when it's on him, how does that help? You want to acquire the evidence?
If you're saying that how should it work? Evidence standing on the road. Otherwise, I don't understand why.
Right. So we're actually going to see. Right. We're actually going to. So we're going to see that in a second, actually, regarding the flip way. We're going to see that in a moment regarding the flip way, regarding Eved. It sounds like that it could work with Karka. So maybe would it work with? There's also could chutz, right? Chutz. It sounds like that it could be because the only flow we have with the Eved is because he's moving. No, not according to this mandam that we're saying right now. He's like metatli. They're saying if you say Eved is metatli, so how are you going to acquire? It says, but when the rug is on him. So I said, what are you chatzar? But chatzar maleches sounds like the whole flaw is because he's maleches. Sounds like if it wasn't maleches, then we would be okay with that being as a chatzar. So the Gemara says, you know what, you have to come up with hilchas. This that we're saying that you're going to acquire through the Eved when it's on him is bekafis. We're talking about where the slave was bound when he's not even ra'u. He's not even able to go. Now he's similar to a chatzar, which Taisa says also you have to say that he's sleeping also, because that's the whole discussion the Gemara brings in Gittin regarding if it's mishtameres l'daitoi, whatever upon him. He can't have any of his own volition involved, so he has to be bound. He has to be sleeping according to Taisa's. I'm going to go and bring what? Like a chatzar. Yeah, exactly, which would be similar to that characteristic of a chatzar. And then that's how that mandam. So it's not a stira. It's not. Put it this way: the Gemara came out. Not necessarily do we say that avodim if it's mekarka metatli is machlekes tanoim. You could say that everyone holds it's either mekarkai or you could say everyone holds it metatli. And as we explained, that there would be a difference if you hold mekarkai, the one that would hold that it's not going to work is because it's not on him because he's not exactly like Agam Mitzvahs Behuda. And the flip side is if everyone holds metatli is the one that holds that it is going to work is because it actually is on him because it's someone that he's bound and maybe even sleeping according to Yisrael, and that's how it's going to be acquired like a halacha b'chatz. Now the Gemara goes back to what we mentioned before and asked the following question. V'hatanya, we learned in the Braisa that says hechzik bekarka, that if you take possession of property, kana avada, you acquire a slave. Now that would make sense if you say that an Eved is like metatlin, which makes sense. The problem is the Braisa we quoted before said you're not going to acquire the Eved when you take possession of. So we already explained it then, but Rashi had addressed what the Gemara is going to say now. But it's a question Before we had said in the brisa where you koin avod, a koin of karki, not koin avodim. And now this brisa says that if you take possession of the karka, you do acquire avodim. How do we resolve that? Says Gemara, awesome. That brisa is ba'im de mitaycha. That's where the slave is standing in the property itself. The brisa quoted before that if you acquire the karka, you're not going to acquire avodim, is talking about where the slave is not inside that field. So it says, wait, the inference is the hide loikana. So you tell me that the first price that said that you're not going to acquire the slave is when the slave is not inside. So wait a second. Now this has ramifications regarding how we explained the two different prices that we said. That makes sense according to the interpretation. The that it says the second interpretation that both brises agree that slaves are like movable items. Oh, okay. So I could understand that if the slave is standing in the field, fine, it will work. Eloi. If you're not standing inside, it's not going to work. But because the way to kind of agav to acquire metalton agav karka is to have the metalton on the karka. But according to that version that said that a slave is like a karka, why would the first brisa be saying that you have to have the slave standing inside? But there's a different teaching from Shmuel. The Gemara brings in Kedushin and Baba Basra. And the person sells someone 10 fields in 10 different countries. Once he takes possession of one of them, he acquires them all. So if an Eved is like karka, why is the first brisa telling me that you need to have oim de mitoicha? And that's why you're explaining that's why when you coin the karka, you're not coin avodim, because you tell me that's different than the other brisa that says you are coin because the Eved's inside of it. Why would the Eved have to be inside of it? But if he's like karka, then he could be in the other end of the world. And when you coin the one karka, you then acquire the other karka too. Well, that was brought up in the context of a chatzir as a metaltlin. We never really mentioned this idea yet of how to qualify the karka of the Eved himself.
Karka of the Eved himself?
Yeah, I mean, like the Eved, like if the Eved himself is karka, that how that might be different than the. I mean, we did say it in like certain context of the Ara Mitzuras Yehuda about acquiring stuff agav the Eved, but we didn't talk about it regarding the Eved and other karka itself also. I hear. Yeah, you have to know exactly what the Gemara's Havamin is, what it knew, but Akaponim, it definitely is addressing the question. It's saying, it's this karka. So if it's karka, so then why would the Eved have to be inside the other karka itself? Because that is different. There's a different discussion regarding. We spoke about in the context of acquiring something through when you acquire the Eved. Now we're talking the other way around. Now we want to know that, which we mentioned from Rashi, but the Gemara didn't talk about it yet. When you want to acquire the Eved through a karka. So if they're both karka, so yeah, if you acquire one karka, you should acquire whatever the karka is, wherever it is. Why do we need the Eved inside this karka itself? So the Gemara says, and according to your reasoning, okay, you're asking on the one who says that avad makam karkoi. But according to your reasoning, according to the one that said that slaves are like movable items, why do I need it to be standing inside? That's also difficult to continue them in base. It's not true. Just that you're assuming that you need to have the movable item on the karka, but our Kaimal, the Gemara tells in first Kedushin of Chavav Man Aleph that movable items are acquired with karka. It does not have to be piled up inside of it. So if that's the case, so why would according to your mandama either have to be inside? Oh, what do you have to say? Because even though regular movable items maybe don't have to be inside, but movable items that move needs to be inside, which is what an Eved is. If you hold these metaltlin, it's a movable thing. And that's different than metaltlin leinai, different movable items that don't move. So now that obviously you have to come on to that differentiation of between, even if you hold this metaltlin, which it's more easier for you, so to speak, to learn that why he has to be inside. So even if you can say like the other interpretation, the Eved is k'makakoi, and you're asking there from Nalach of Shmuel that it's like karka, so if you acquire it, you could have karka at the other end of the world. I could say the same thing. Shani mikakoi denaidi, property that moves is different from property that doesn't move. A slave, even if he's karka, but he's movable. So therefore, you cannot acquire in New Jersey and have the evet in Hawaii. It's not going to work because he's movable. Just like if you hold that he's metatlin, it's also not going to work, even though other metatlin doesn't have to be on top of it. And Hasan Brom and Shmuel's halacha sadna de arachatu. The extension of the ground is one. I mean to say we're all connected. It wasn't developed by Bell whatever technology. It was like all connected, right? It was the world, the earth is all one entity of land. So therefore, it could be the other end of the world because it's all one element. But an evet is not the same karka as karka, and the virtue of that he moves. So therefore, that's why he's not going to be able to be acquired unless he's actually on the property itself. Now we continue to look at the Mishnah that spoke about the liability. The second Mishnah spoke about that certain criterion that's necessary to be chayiv for hezek, and one of them was the chasam she'im ben me'ilah, only if it is a property that does not have me'ilah. Because if it has me'ilah, which makes it hektish, we know that shere'eyu, you only chayiv if your ox gores your friend's ox, but if it damages that of hektish, you're going to be patur. The problem the Gemara has is the wording of the Mishnah. It sounds like that, me'ilahu. It's me'ilah that you need to have, the lesbahu, that you're not going to have in those properties for me to be liable in the zakat. But it sounds like if there's no me'ilah, if there's no liability of misappropriation, even if mikdash kachi, even if it is holy, I still would be liable for the damages. For example, where do you have that? Isn't all kachim me'ilah? No. Kachim kalam, the lower level kachim, karbanas, there is no me'ilah on that animal when it's alive. It's only in the imurim, the sacrificial parts, after you sprayed the blood, like the Gemara has a girs in Mesechus Me'ilah Daf Zayin Mebez. So wait a second. So then Mantana, who is the Tana of our mission that holds that you'll be liable for damages if your ox damage your friend's shlamim that he's waiting to bring up to the Beis Hamikdash, that you would be chayiv? Rabbi Yochanan says it's bekachim kalim, it's by the lower level karbanas, but libi de risa glili, because the Amahi says mammon bailamu. It actually is considered the money of your friend, and hence, like Rashi explains, it's qualified as shoyre'ehu. So when your ox gores his carbon shlamim, you will be chayiv, and therefore that's why the wording of the Mishnah was precise to say that when are you going to be patur? Is nechasim to have me'ilah, and you're going to be chayiv when there's nechasim that don't have me'ilah, even though it is kodshim. And the reason why there's no me'ilah, because we don't consider Hashem's money, consider it this guy's money. The time like learn the Braisa. A very different context. There's a pasuk in Vayikra that says, "Umala ma'al ba'Hashem." It says that if a person is going to sin and he's going to misappropriate by Hashem, how? How's he misappropriating by Hashem? So this is not the halacha of me'ilah of Hashem me'ilas. It's actually a very different context. It says v'chichish ba'misa, if he denies by his friend a deposit or a loan or stolen or whatever it is. This is by the halacha what's known as shvuas hapikadon. A guy says, "Hey, remember that phone I told you to watch me?" He says, "What phone?" Well, I gave it to you a few hours ago. I'm no itoma. Takes him to court. Says, "I gave him the guy." The guy swears falsely, and then we find out that he was lying. So then he's liable for this false oath of that deposit. Now, why does it say there mal b'Hashem? This has nothing to do with Hashem. This has to do with your friend, your neighbor, your former friend, who swore falsely regarding the deposit. Oh, the word Bashem is l'rabba is kodshim kalam, coming to include something. The lower level karbana is that if you deposited by your friend, say, "Hey, I'm going away for a few days. Do me a favor, my pet shlamim that I'm going to slaughter in a few weeks. I'm going to go to Beis Hamikdash. I need you to watch." Come back, says, "Hey, where's my animal?" He says, "Anotoma, lahadam, never happened." And he swears, he goes, yes. And then he admits he has regret. Allah is just to pay the principal of the animal, an added fifth, and a carbon asham. Now, although the halacha is by kachay shemayim, by regular kachim, by karbanas, there's no halacha of shvua. You don't swear regarding kachim, as the Gemara learns in Hazav and Bamatzidaf and Bava Aleph. But by kachim kalim, there is this halacha of swearing, And there, if you swore falsely, you'll be chayiv. Why? Shehein memoinoi. Because it's your friend's money. It qualifies for what the pasuk is, Bashem v'chichish ba'misai v'chichish. Which means you read v'chichish both on Bashem and on ba'misai. Because in a way, it's Hashem's, it's kachim kalam, it's a carbon. But in a way, it's really your friend's. Because Divrei B'Yiseglili, he holds that kachim kalam is mum and bailam. So it is his money. And hence he's the Tana of our Mishnah that held that you, and therefore there's no me'ilah. And because there's only me'ilah by kachim kalam only after you spray the blood. So at this point, there's no me'ilah. That's actually where you're going to be chayiv, even though it is kachim. Now, the Gemara has a difficulty with this. What's not? However, there's a Mishnah Mesechtes Kedushin that says, HaMekadesh, if someone is Mekadesh a woman, he says, Hared Mekadesh Esli Bechelkoi, with his portion of Kachim. Now, Bein Bekachim Kachim, Bein Bekachim Kalam, whether in the high level like Chatas and Asham, or the low level Karbanis like Shlamim and Taida, in Mekadesh, she's not going to be engaged. Says the Gemara, shall we say, based on what you just told me, that Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yiseglili? Why? Because Rabbi Yiseglili held that Kachim Kalam is mum and bailim. It's my money. Why can't I give it to a woman and be Mekadesha? I could give her anything Shabbat Kesef. What? What is? Yeah, whatever it is. I'm saying, but if you hold it's Hashem's money, Kachim, everyone agrees you can't be Mekadesha a woman with a Kachim. It's not my money. Kachim Kalam, Rabbi Yiseglili is saying it's your money, and that's why you can be chayiv in our Mishnah of Shoyrei Eyu, because even though when there's no me'ilah because it's yours. So shall we say that Mishnah Kedushin not like Rabbi Yiseglili? Says no. So Rabbi Yiseglili, you could say that Mishnah is like Rabbi Yiseglili. Kiyam Rabbi Yiseglili, when Rabbi Yiseglili say that the Kachim Kalam is the owner's money, is Michayim, is when it's still alive. And as Rashi explains, where you have the responsibility of bringing the carbon, you have to insure it. So in that sense, we consider it as your money. But that Mishnah is talking about after it was slaughtered. Even after it's slaughtered, it's interestingly, even Rabbi Yiseglili would agree that actually, even though you're getting it actually now, that no, the chikazachu, when you're meriting it, whether it be the kahanim who get the breast and the thigh, whether it be the owner and the rest of the meat, it's meshulchan gavaya kazachu. You're meriting it from Hashem's higher table. So that's not yours. Hashem lets you use it. Hashem lets you eat it. But don't forget whose house this is. You're eating by my table. And it's my stuff. Right? We remind our kids all the time whose clothing this is, whose money it is. Right? You get all this stuff, but it's not your money.
Who says that she will fulfill the shechita? If he gives her something that's
I mean, it's a carbon, and what you want to know what happens is no me'ilah, it's isser, whatever, it's isser me'ilah. But the point is that it was designated to be a carbon. It's l'maisa hars. When you give her ma'aser sheni, who said she's going to take it up to? That's what we spoke about. Who's going to be Yerushalayim? But l'maisa, it has monetary value, and she owns it. But yeah, then she would bring it as a carbon. So therefore, that's not difficult. Could be the Mishnahs like Rabbi Yiseglili. But says the Gemara, really? Mechaymi Amar? When and Tais discusses the wordings that we're saying regarding verses, it sounds like la'ach shchita, but did really Rabbi Yiseglili say that when the carbon shlamim is still alive, that we said that it's considered the person's money? But now we learn the Mishnah Ma'aser Sheni that says that b'choyer meichrin eisai. This gets a little bit complex, and there's different girsayis later on regarding what should be gurus and not, based on the Vilna. But al kapanim, the simple understanding is like this: b'choyer meichrin eisai, a firstborn animal, you sell it. As Rashi explains in today's times, as Gemara is going to explain later on, where kahanim could sell it to another kayin. So what happens is, if a firstborn animal has a kedusha, firstborn animal, time is the base of Migdash, is supposed to be brought as a carbon. Now, there's a difference if it's in Eretz Yisrael or out of Eretz Yisrael, as we're going to see. But akapanim, in today's times, when there's no more shchita, so you can't eat a unblemished b'char, because obviously it has kedusha, but there's no base of Migdash. You could only eat it when it develops a blemish, just like it is in times of base of Migdash too. But akapanim, today's times, that the firstborn animal moichrei, so you could sell it tam chai, when it's alive and unblemished, Now, the reason why, although usually when it's unblemished and alive, you're not allowed to sell it because it has to be brought as a carbon, that doesn't apply in today's times when there is no Beis Hamikdash. But the buyer has to wait until it develops a blemish, and then he could slaughter it. But when it's unblemished, obviously you cannot have it slaughtered because then there would be no remedy but to bury it because it's forbidden to have anah because it's still kodshim when it's unblemished. And if it's slaughtered out of the Beis Hamikdash, which we can't go into the Beis Hamikdash, so therefore it'd be shchutei chutz, so you have to bury it. But if it's unblemished and alive, you could sell it. And ubal mumchai v'shachat. Also, you could sell if it's blemished. Then you could sell it whether it's alive or whether it's slaughtered, because that's okay. Because since it was blemished, so it doesn't have a kedusha anymore. And then, okay, now you could slaughter it, and obviously it could be eaten or alive. Fine. And the main thing we're really getting to is the next part, the Makadshin Boy. Now, these Kahanim could go ahead and be Makadish as a Isha, the woman, with this Bachar, because it's their money. Because the owners of the Bachar is the Kayin, because the moment the Bachar is born, it's one of the Chaftal Matnas Kuhun, it's one of the 24 Kahana gifts, it's already the Kayin's. So it's his money, he could be Kaddish a woman. Okay, but the V'amar Rab Nachman Amar Avu, he says, Loi Shanu, we didn't learn this halacha that a b'chayr, a firstborn animal that's alive, is considered mammon bailim. It's considered the money of the owner. When it's unblemished, he qualifies what we already mentioned before. That's el b'chayr bezman hazeh. It's only a b'chayr in today's times. Why? What's special about these times? The kivin al chazal krava, since they obviously cannot sacrifice it. So islul kahanim zchiyah begavayu. So when it's, even though it's still alive, I mean, usually a person would bring it as a carbon and the kahan would get to eat from the b'char and that's when it would happen. But now, when there is no one's bringing the carbon, so the moment when it's born, when it's still alive, the kahan already have rights in it. Avol b'zman shebeis hamikdash kayim, when the beis hamikdash is still around, the chazal krava that's fit for sacrificing, then loy, then not. Then it wouldn't be considered the kahanim's right away when it's born. When it's born, it's when it's brought as a carbon in the Beis Hamikdash. So this that was saying that when it's mechayim and that they really could be mekadosh isha, it's considered the money of the b'char. That's only bisman hazeh, but it's not, and that's why according to the Gemara like stops over here, which really that's relevant to what we said before. Basically holds that no, we see mechayim. It is considered his. In our Gemara, we're being it sound like that. No, it's only Bezman Hazeh. But Bezman Shebezimigdash Kayim, it wouldn't be considered as yours. Well, B'char is also Kachim Kalim. And Tosh discusses some of the contrast between B'char and between that of Shlamim, other Kachim Kalim. But upon him, the Gemara continues according to our Girsa. The Esri Rav Nachman, Rav Esther Rav Nachman, he says, wait a second. We had, it says in the Pasuk of Molam al Bashem, that if someone is swearing falsely regarding a deposit. So what's Bashem? It's not Bashem, it's in your friend. Oh, it's L'Rabbis Kachim Kalim, that's coming to include, which we quoted this teaching before, that's coming to include the low-level Karbanas, Shehein Mamoinai, where it's his money, as Rashi explains the Gemara's question, that's even at the time the Beis Hamikdash was around, because the Pasuk Yeshua Habikadon was obviously at the time the Beis Hamikdash was around, that we're going to make you liable for carbon asham. So obviously it's by the time of the Beis Hamikdash, Divrei Beis Glili. So wait a second. When the Beis Hamikdash is around, and you have an animal that's kachim kalim, is it the person's money or is it not? Rav Nachman, you told me before that the Mishnah that we quoted, Meisa Sheni, is saying that you could be Mekadosh the Isha when the kachim kalim, let's say the B'char, is still alive, there's only Bizman Hazeh. But at the time of Beis Hamikdash, not. What do you mean? Rabbi Glili, the teaching we quoted previously, which the Gemara is asking from now, says Rava, holds that you see Shavuos HaBekadon, which was the time of Beis Hamikdash, even when it's alive, it is considered Mammon Bailam. So what is it? Is Kachim B'Kal Mammon Bailam or not? Mashani Ravina answered, he says, not a difficulty, because here we were saying that it is Mammon Bailam, is b'bechar is by a firstborn animal that's born b'chutz la'aretz. It's born out of Eretz Yisrael in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, where you're right, there it's not going to be sacrificed. Why not? The firstborn animal. Because Raliba did Rabbi Shimon, it's going like Rabbi Shimon. The Amad that he says in Mesech T'mur Daf Chafal Med Aleph, he says, Imbo, if the firstborn animal is brought from Chutzlar to Eretz Yisrael to me unblemished, okay, Yikruvu, then you'll sacrifice it. Now the inference of his words are, Imbo, in. Yes, if you bring it, fine. But like initially, one should not bring his firstborn animal from Chutzlar to bring to Eretz Yisrael. Rather, you should let it graze until it develops a blemish. And the Gemara elsewhere explains why would he hold like that. But the point of it is that since it's not for Hakrava, so yes, that's why it's Mom and Koyanim. That's how he answered the question. But now here's where the final question is. But Vem Isa, now if it's true what you said or previously on this Amid, the Chiyam Glili, when did Glili say that Mamaynahu Michayim, that when is this Kachim Kalim the person's possession, it's his money, is when it's still alive, as we learned in our Mishnah, that we say that you're going to be chayiv if your shar gores your neighbor's carbon shlum that he's going to bring. We explained, how is that possible? It doesn't have to be shari'eyu. Oh, it is shari'eyu because like Rabbi Glili who holds that, yes, even when it's still alive, it's considered mom and bailim, it's not Hashem's money. Wait a second, so what do you have to give me this teretz to answer the contradiction of telling me that, oh, yeah, B'chor depends where it was born in Eretz Yisrael, you're right, then it's not Mama Bailim, it would only be, let's say, when the Beis Mikdash is not around, but when would it be Mama Bailim to explain the halacha of Molam al B'Hashem, but by Shvus B'Kadin, when the Chutzlaret, so Chutzlaret really is not going to be brought as a carbon, so now it's already considered Mama Bailim. Why do you have to come on to that? As the Gemara continues over the Yigim and Alf, you could have given a different type of answer. You could have said, Lishani, Ravina could have answered, the Brisa is Rabbi Yisrael Glili. Rabbi Yisrael Glili holds that the money is his mammon, even when it's still alive. And that's what it was told about. Amol Bashem, Rabbis Kachim Kalim, Shem Emainai. But Rav Nachman's teaching that he was talking about that a Bechor that's alive, that's unblemished, that he said that in the times of Beis HaMikdash is not going to be Mom and Bailim, is going like the Rabbanan. Why would that be such a difficulty to explain it like that? That it's a machlokes between this Rabbi Yisrael Glili and the Rabbanan. Says the Gemara, no. Because Matnas Kuhuna Ka'amrit, this halacha that we're asking from is the Bechor. Now, Rabbi Yisrael Glili, you're right. He told us that Kashim Kalman is Mom and Bailim even when it's alive. So let's say, imagine a carbon shlum. Carbon shlum, you're right. It's considered that he's the halacha of our Mishnah, that even if your shar damages his shar, it's Mom and Bailim. But you would not be able to explain that for the halacha of Bechor, which seems to be the equivalent. Bechor is also a Kashim Kalim. And you would say, okay, so they're also, when it's alive, they consider Mom and Bailim. No, because that is one of the 24 kind of gifts, is the Bechor that's given to the Kohen. Shani Matnas Kuhuna, Matnas Kuhuna is different because the Chika Zachu, when does a Kohen merit it? It's Meshulchan Gavaya Kazachu. He merited it from Hashem's table. Oh, so therefore Ravina had explained that this teaching of Nachman, like Rabbi Yisrael Glili, because he also, meaning that's even like Rabbi Yisrael Glili, and you had to say that answer of Bechor and Chutz La'aretz, even according to Rabbi Yisrael Glili. Why? Because Rabbi Yisrael Glili also would agree over here that as long as when the Beis HaMikdash is around, that it's from Hashem's table that they can't get it, even when it's alive. When did Rabbi Yisrael Glili say that when it's alive, it's Mom and Bailim, is let's say by Shlamim? The owner is Yisrael, where Hashem never yet got possession of it when it's still alive. So you're going to be chayv when you're sure gores that guy's Shlamim. It's Shari'eyu, and it's not Sharshal Hektish. It's not Hashem's yet. But Bechor is different. So although that the Bechor goes to the Kohen, we cannot consider that as quote unquote Mom and Bailim. It's no different than L'achar Misa, when the Kohen gets that portion, we don't consider it as Mamoinoi, it's Hashem's money. He just gets the utility of it. and that's why even Rabbi Shloimy would have to say the same teretz as that it's b'chor b'chutz la'aretz. Rashi just ends off by saying that Ravina had explained for Rabbi Shloimy that it's Tomar B'char and Chutzlars. Why didn't he just say it's Tomar Shlamim? Yes, in B'char you would have to say that Shtikol Torah, that it's B'chutzlars, because a kohen doesn't have any monetary ownership in the B'char. It's Meshulchan Gevay Kazacha, but just say it's a Shlamim. Says Rashi, no, because the Sefer of the Brisa is obvious that it's Tomar B'char, because that Brisa, which we didn't quote in our Gemara, says that Benazi didn't say it only Benazi didn't say it only by B'char, and Benazi is coming to explain the teaching of Rabbi Yossi, which Gemara later on is going to explain that. But Akaban, it's obvious Tomar B'char. So if Tomar B'char, so then that's what the Gemara is saying, that even Rabbi Shloimy would have to say that it's Tomar B'char and Chutz La'aretz, which yes, it's like when there's no Beis Hamikdash around, because you're not going to be makar because in Chutz La'aretz you're not supposed to bring it, and therefore that's why it could be considered as the moment of the Kehanim right away. But in general, if there is a Beis Hamikdash and it's an Eretz Yisrael, then no, even when it's still alive, it's not going to be the same as the other Kashim Kalam, as let's say Shlamim, because that when anything the Kohen gets is getting it from Hashem, and therefore it's not his own money, and therefore he would not give him the Kaddish Isha, and therefore it must have been told about a Chutzlah. Thank you to any time.